The afternoon sun shone through the living room curtains, casting faint shadows on the walls of Ethan's house. The clock ticked slowly as if marking the passage of time without enthusiasm. Ethan sat on the sofa, staring blankly at the television without really paying attention. For months, he had felt that something was wrong in his marriage to Jessica. The small arguments that used to be resolved with laughter now always ended with raised voices and hurt feelings. Jessica often made him feel guilty, even though Ethan knew he hadn't done anything wrong. His wife's subtle manipulation made Ethan keep quiet more often, allowing the arguments to end without resolution. Day after day he felt trapped in an exhausting cycle. In his solitude, Ethan remembered the beginning of their marriage. Jessica was an energetic person, always cheerful, making his days colorful. But all of that slowly faded. The sweet smile he once knew was now more often replaced by sharp glances or sarcastic comments. Ethan tried to close his eyes, convincing himself that this was just a phase that would pass, but in his heart grew a suspicion he couldn't suppress. One night, after a trivial argument, Ethan couldn't sleep. He stood in front of his bedroom window, looking at the dim moonlight. There was a strong feeling of emptiness, as if he had lost something he couldn't put into words. His heart whispered that Jessica was hiding a big secret, a truth that he would one day discover. In the days that followed, that feeling grew stronger. Jessica often came home later than usual, citing work or meetings with friends. However, every time Ethan tried to ask more questions, he only got short answers that closed the door to further conversation. Ethan didn't want to be a suspicious husband, but his instincts told him otherwise. That afternoon, as Ethan sat in the living room reading the newspaper, he heard Jessica's voice from the next room. Her voice was different, softer, more intimate. He leaned forward, trying to listen carefully. The more he focused, the clearer the voice became. Jessica laughed softly, then uttered a word that made Ethan's body tense. The word was spoken in an intimate tone, full of tenderness, and addressed to someone on the other end of the phone. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, trying to make sure his ears weren't deceiving him. But the voice was so real. His blood rushed, but his face remained calm. He held his breath, then slowly reached for a pen and a piece of paper on the table. With slightly trembling hands, he wrote down the phone number that appeared on Jessica's cell phone screen as she hurriedly left the room. In his chest, there was a turmoil of anger, hurt, and curiosity. But Ethan chose to remain silent. He knew that dealing with a problem like this could not be done with overflowing emotions. He had to ascertain the truth, had to uncover everything with irrefutable evidence. That night, as Jessica slept, Ethan looked at the number he had written down. His heart told him this was the beginning of something big. Something that could change his life forever. And Ethan knew he had to be prepared for any possibility. That morning, the air felt heavier for Ethan. He woke up earlier than usual, sitting at the dining table staring at a cup of cold coffee. Thoughts of the phone call he had received yesterday afternoon still bothered him. The number he had written down was neatly folded in his pants pocket, as if it were a secret burning in his chest. Jessica came down from her room dressed neatly, a faint scent of perfume in the air, making the breakfast atmosphere feel strange. She talked as usual, asking light-hearted questions, but Ethan only responded as necessary. Behind his calm face, his mind was working hard. He had to find out who owned that number, who was the man that made his wife sound so intimate. After Jessica left, Ethan picked up his cell phone. He stared at the screen for a while before finally typing in the number. His finger paused over the call button. He felt hesitant, afraid that the man on the other end would immediately recognize his voice. He changed his mind and pressed the cancel button. He knew he needed a smarter approach. That afternoon, Ethan met Ryan at a small cafe near the city center. Ryan was his old friend, someone he always trusted. They sat in a corner of the room, away from the crowd. Ethan took out a small piece of paper with the phone number on it and placed it on the table. Ryan looked at the numbers, then looked at Ethan seriously. "Are you sure this is the number he called yesterday?" he asked softly. Ethan nodded, his eyes full of conviction mixed with pain. Without saying much, Ryan took out his laptop. He had several acquaintances and access to information networks that could track phone numbers. Ethan sat quietly, waiting with his heart pounding. A few minutes passed, Ryan's fingers moved quickly on the keyboard, then a name appeared on the screen. That name made Ethan feel as if the world was spinning faster. Daniel Vance. A man who was not unfamiliar to him. Ethan had heard that name mentioned in their small town's business and social circles. But he never expected that name to appear in a situation like this. "He's the one Jessica called," Ryan said, his voice heavy. Ethan clutched his coffee cup tightly, as if wanting to transfer all his emotions to the inanimate object. Part of him wanted to go home immediately, demand answers from Jessica, but his reason held him back. Acting too quickly would only cause the truth to hide deeper. If I may be honest, we need more evidence than just a name and phone number, Ryan continued. You have to have something she can't deny. Ethan was silent. Those words were true. He couldn't be reckless. He had to find a way to reveal everything so that Jessica would have no room to lie anymore. That night Ethan returned home. Jessica was already asleep, her face looking peaceful under the light of the bedside lamp. Ethan stood in the doorway, staring at the woman he once loved unconditionally. A bitter feeling crept in. He wanted to be angry, to wake Jessica up and ask her directly. But he knew the time wasn't right. Ethan stepped out of the room with a heavy heart. He stood in the living room, staring into the darkness outside the window. The name Daniel Vance echoed in his head, bringing 1,000 unanswered questions. That night Ethan promised himself he would find the truth, no matter how bitter the outcome might be. The following days were increasingly stressful for Ethan. He tried to act normal in front of Jessica, hiding all the suspicions that were now piling up in his heart. However, his wife's every move seemed increasingly suspicious. She made phone calls in a hushed tone, quickly deleted text messages, and smiled faintly when she thought Ethan wasn't looking. All of these were like pieces of a puzzle that were increasingly forming a picture of betrayal. Ethan knew he couldn't act alone. He needed someone who could approach Jessica without arousing suspicion. That's when he remembered Emily, Jessica's old friend and Ryan's wife. Their relationship was quite close, so Jessica often spoke more openly to Emily than to anyone else. That night at a small restaurant Ethan, Ryan, and Emily met. The dim lighting made their conversation feel secretive. Ethan explained everything that had happened, from the phone call he overheard to the name Daniel Vance that came up after their little investigation. Emily was silent for quite a while, her expression difficult to read. I know Jessica can be difficult sometimes, Emily finally said, her voice soft but clear. But I didn't think she would go this far. If what you suspect is true, then the best way is to get her to confess without feeling trapped. Ethan looked at Emily hopefully. Can you do that? He asked. Emily took a deep breath, then nodded. I'll try to talk to her casually like a normal friend. I know how to make her feel safe. If she talks, I'll record the conversation. The next day, Emily carried out her plan. She invited Jessica for coffee at a cozy cafe. The conversation started off light, talking about work, daily life, and light gossip. Jessica seemed relaxed, even laughing a few times. Emily skillfully steered the conversation, touching on the subject of domestic relationships. Slowly, Jessica began to open up. She complained about Ethan, saying he was too rigid, too serious, and didn't pay enough attention to her. Emily just nodded as if she understood. Then, with a little encouragement, Jessica began to talk about her happiness with someone she said made her feel alive again. Emily pretended to be surprised, then chuckled. Who is this lucky man? She asked jokingly. Jessica smiled faintly, her eyes sparkling with unwarranted pride. Daniel, she replied softly, as if keeping a big secret that also made her proud. Emily remained calm, even though her heart was racing. She listened carefully to every word, making sure the small recorder in her bag was still on. Jessica became more and more engrossed in her story, even casually mentioning that Daniel was not the only man who had ever been secretly present in her life. Those words hit Emily's ears like a thunderbolt. She knew that the evidence Ethan needed was now in her hands. The casual conversation had turned into an unconscious confession, a bitter truth that would destroy her best friend's marriage. Elsewhere, Ethan waited anxiously. He paced back and forth in his living room, glancing repeatedly at the clock on the wall. When his phone finally vibrated, he immediately answered it. Emily's voice was soft but certain. I got everything, Ethan. He confessed. Ethan closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. His chest felt tight, yet at the same time relieved. Part of him was shattered by the truth, but another part felt ready to move on to the next stage. That night, he knew that his journey toward the truth had only just begun. Alright, I'll continue with Chapter 4. The story is about 3 minutes long, maintaining a sense of tension and curiosity. Chapter 4. An unexpected alliance. That night, Ethan sat alone in his office. The desk lamp illuminated the scattered files, but his mind couldn't focus on any work. He already had Emily's recording in his hands. Jessica's voice, so clear and confident when she mentioned Daniel's name, kept ringing in his head. Every word felt like a dagger slowly piercing his heart. He played the recording again, closing his eyes when he heard Jessica's small laugh as she mentioned that Daniel wasn't the only man in her life. Amidst the suffocating pain, a determination grew stronger. Ethan knew he couldn't let this end with mere suspicion. He had to close all avenues for Jessica to lie again. That's when an idea came to him. If Jessica was cheating on him with Daniel, then there was someone else who was also a victim of this betrayal. Someone who had the right to know the truth. Sophia, Daniel's wife. With trembling hands, Ethan searched for information about Sophia. It wasn't difficult for him to find her contact number, thanks to a little help from Ryan. He stared at his phone screen for a long time before finally plucking up the courage to press the call button. The phone rang, then a woman's voice answered. The voice sounded cautious, a little stiff. "Hello." Ethan swallowed, then introduced himself in a calm voice. "I'm Ethan, Jessica's husband." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Sophia's voice sounded even quieter after that. "Why are you calling me?" Ethan took a deep breath, then answered carefully. "Because I think we're in the same situation." Sophia was silent, as if trying to digest the meaning of that sentence. Ethan then explained slowly, without excessive emotion, only with facts. He told her about the phone call he overheard, about the investigation with Ryan, and the recording made by Emily. When she heard Daniel's name, Sophia sighed heavily. "I've suspected it for a long time," she said softly. "Daniel often comes home late at night, and every time I ask him, his excuse is always the same. But I know he's hiding something." Sophia's voice trembled, but it was also filled with the same determination as Ethan's. The two of them, without ever planning it, now stood on the same side. Victims of their partner's lies. Then, Ethan said firmly, "We have to work together. Not only to prove the truth, but also to end all these lies." Sophia was silent for a moment, then replied, "Okay. I agree. But how?" Ethan stared at the computer screen in front of him, staring at Jessica's voice recording that was still stored there. "We'll make them face the truth directly. There will be no more escape, no more excuses. When they face us, it will all end." That night, two people who had never been close before formed an unexpected alliance. An alliance formed not out of trust, but out of hurt. And from that pain, a determination was born to fight betrayal in a way that could no longer be avoided. In Ethan's heart, curiosity mixed with anxiety. How would Jessica react when confronted with the evidence? How would Daniel respond when his own wife found out his dirty secret? All these questions hung in the air, waiting for the right moment to be answered. A few days after talking with Sophia, Ethan began to make plans. He knew Jessica and Daniel needed a special place to carry on their secret relationship. A place far from home in the eyes of those closest to them. He asked Ryan for help in finding it. It didn't take long before the information was found. That afternoon, Ryan came with the news. "I know where they usually meet," he said briefly, then handed over a piece of paper with the address on it. Ethan stared at the writing for quite a while, his heart pounding. An apartment in the city center, a location that seemed ordinary to others, but held a dark secret that would change everything. Ethan didn't go there right away. He chose to observe first. The next night, he drove through the city, stopping not far from the apartment building. The streetlights cast long shadows on the asphalt, while the building stood quietly, as if hiding all its stories behind its walls. From a distance, Ethan saw a car he recognized very well. Jessica's car. A few minutes later, a man got out of a taxi and entered the building. That figure was none other than Daniel. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes filled with anger, but he held back. He didn't come that night to rage. That night he just wanted to make sure. He waited until late, watching as the light in one of the windows stayed on for quite a while. The faint shadows of two people could be seen behind the curtains. His chest felt tight, but he was also determined. He already had his confirmation. Now he just had to decide on the right time to strike. The next day, Ethan met up with Sophia again. They sat across from each other in a quiet city park, far from the crowds. Sophia looked pale, her eyes puffy as if she had spent the previous night in tears. "So it's true," she said softly after hearing Ethan's report. "Daniel did meet Jessica at that apartment." Ethan nodded slowly. "I saw it myself. They can't hide anymore. The question now is, when are we going to make them face it?" Sophia looked at Ethan with eyes full of pain, but also full of courage. "I want to be there. I want to see Daniel's face when all his lies are exposed." Ethan stared into the distance, his mind racing. He knew the confrontation would be a point of no return. But that was where the suffering of both of them would end. That night, Ethan stood in front of the bathroom mirror. His face looked tired, the fine lines around his eyes becoming more pronounced. He touched the glass as if looking at another figure reflected there. Someone who was no longer the same Ethan he used to be. The image of the apartment, Jessica's voice in the recording, and Daniel's name that kept echoing in his mind all combined into a small fire in his heart. The fire did not go out, but instead burned even brighter. He knew that the day of confrontation was drawing nearer. The day when all masks would be removed, and the truth would finally stand before them, undeniable. It was raining heavily that night, pelting Ethan's windows with an irregular rhythm. He sat in the living room, staring at the papers on the table. Among them was the divorce document he had prepared. His heart was racing, but his mind remained clear. His mind was made up. All he was waiting for was the right moment. Ryan arrived with 2 cups of coffee. He sat across from Ethan, looking at his friend with concern. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked slowly. Ethan nodded. "I want her to know that all these lies are over. There's no more room to hide." The sound of rain added to the silence between them. Ryan then placed his hand on the table, leaning in slightly. "Then you need the right place and time. Don't do it at home, don't do it at the office. Do it where they feel safe so they have no reason to run away." Ethan stared at Ryan for a long time before finally nodding slowly. The words made sense. He then remembered the apartment he had seen a few days ago. The place that was supposed to be a secret hideout would now become an open stage. A few days later, Ethan met up with Sophia again. They sat in a quiet restaurant with only a few tables occupied. Sophia was wearing a dark coat, her face still bearing scars, but her eyes were full of determination. "That apartment," Ethan said firmly. "That's where we'll do it." Sophia looked at him, then slowly nodded. "I'll go with you. I want to see them face the truth." They began to work out the details. The day and time were chosen carefully, ensuring that Jessica and Daniel would be there at the same time. Ethan prepared a recording of Jessica's confession, saving it on his cell phone so it would be easy to play. He also brought the divorce papers as if to signify that this was not just anger, but a final decision. The night before the confrontation, Ethan could hardly sleep. He lay in bed with his eyes open, listening to the clock ticking loudly. Jessica slept beside him, her face looking peaceful as if she had no burdens. This contrasted with the lies in her heart. Ethan stared at the ceiling, thinking deeply. It was no longer about how to save his marriage, but how to end it with dignity. He didn't want any shouting, he didn't want any angry outbursts. He just wanted the truth to finally be laid bare for all to see. That morning, Ethan stood in front of the mirror. He smoothed his suit, his face calm even though a storm raged inside him. He looked into his own eyes as if talking to the figure behind the glass. "Today, everything ends." Alright, I'll continue with chapter 7. I'll keep the story to about 3 minutes of reading time, building tension towards the climax. Chapter 7. The secret stage. The afternoon sky was gray, thick clouds hanging low over the city. Ethan parked his car not far from the apartment building he had become familiar with during his previous nighttime observations. Sophia sat in the passenger seat, her face pale but her eyes burning with an indescribable courage. "Are you sure you're ready?" Ethan asked softly. Sophia turned her head, taking a deep breath. "I have to be ready. It's better to face the painful truth than to continue living a lie." They got out of the car and walked into the apartment building. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the long corridor, as if signaling something big was about to happen. Ethan's heart was pounding, every second feeling like an echo in his ears. In front of the apartment door they stopped. Ethan knocked calmly without rushing. From inside they heard footsteps, then the door opened. Daniel stood there, his face surprised to see them. A few seconds later, Jessica appeared from behind him, her face suddenly pale. "Ethan?" Jessica's voice caught in her throat. "What are you doing here?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He stepped inside with Sophia, passing Daniel who was still frozen in place. The apartment was simple, but Jessica's perfume was so strong it filled the room. Ethan stood upright in the middle of the room, staring at Jessica with a gaze that was no longer gentle. "I came here for one thing," Ethan said flatly. He reached into his pocket, took out his cell phone and turned on the voice recording. Jessica's own voice filled the room. Her laughter, her voice admitting that she had cheated on Daniel, even mentioning that she had done it with other men before. Every word was clear, undeniable. Jessica's face paled, her body trembling. It's not what you think, Ethan. But her words were cut off when Sophia stepped forward, staring at her husband with a look of anger and disappointment. "Daniel," her voice broke, "how long have you been deceiving me?" Daniel was silent, unable to look at his wife. His hands were clenched, his face red, but no words came out. Ethan took a folder out of his bag and placed it on the table. Divorce papers. The sound of the paper hitting the table was loud, piercing the silence of the room. Jessica turned her head toward the folder, her eyes widening, then looked at Ethan with an expression of panic and fear. You really want to end this?" Her voice was almost a whisper. Ethan looked at her, this time with piercing calm. "There's nothing left to hold on to, Jessica. You've chosen your own path. And I've chosen to no longer live a lie." Silence filled the room. Sophia stood in the corner, staring at Daniel with teary yet determined eyes. Ethan stood tall, while Jessica seemed to waver, as if her entire world had collapsed in an instant. The apartment felt cramped, the air seemed to stand still. Jessica stood frozen, her face pale, while the recording of her voice still echoed in the memories of everyone there. Ethan didn't say much, just stared with cold eyes as if there was no room for compassion anymore. "Ethan, listen to me," Jessica's voice broke, her hand reaching out as if to touch her husband's arm. But Ethan shifted half a step away, avoiding her without a word. That small movement shattered the last of the hope remaining in Jessica's eyes. Sophia stepped forward, staring at her husband with a sharp gaze. "You're not even trying to deny it, Daniel? Your silence is answer enough. Everything I've suspected all this time is true." Daniel sighed heavily and looked down. I don't know what to say." "You don't know?" Sophia's voice rose. "You destroyed our marriage and your only answer is that you don't know?" The tension rose, Sophia's sobs mingling with the rain that was still dripping from outside the window. Ethan stood between them, calm, even though a storm was raging inside his chest. He knew this was the decisive moment. Jessica tried once more to approach him. "Ethan, I was wrong. I made a mistake. I need you to give me a chance." But Ethan raised his hand, stopping her words. His voice was calm but firm. "I've given you chances many times, Jessica. And you chose to betray me not just once but many times. You could even laugh when you told other people about it. That's not a mistake, that's a choice." Those words pierced Jessica, making her sob. She covered her face with both hands, her body shaking violently. But those tears no longer moved Ethan's heart. He knew those tears were not sincere remorse, but a trap he had heard many times before. Sophia turned to Ethan, her voice soft but full of respect. "You are stronger than I thought. I don't know if I could be that strong if I were in your position." Ethan did not turn his head. His eyes remained fixed on Jessica, who was now sitting in a chair, drowning in her own tears. To him, those tears were merely the echo of a long lie that had finally collapsed. In his heart, Ethan felt something new growing. No longer burning anger but a cold calmness. He realized that his decision was final. There was no turning back. There was no room for regret. There was only the road ahead, the road to freedom. Outside, the rain grew heavier, as if bearing witness to the collapse of a household and the unveiling of a dark secret that had been hidden all this time. The silence hanging in the apartment slowly turned into a weight pressing down on everyone's chest. Jessica was still sobbing, trying to wipe away the tears that kept falling down her cheeks. Daniel stood stiffly, his face pale, his lips trembling, but not a single word came out. Sophia stood in the corner of the room, staring at him with a sharp, cold gaze, the gaze of a wife who had just lost all trust. Ethan finally stepped forward. His voice was calm, though every word sounded like a hammer striking. "Everything is clear. I won't prolong this. Jessica, in that folder are the divorce papers. I've signed my part. You're free to sign or not, but I'm not coming back. Our marriage ends here." Jessica sobbed even harder. She ran towards Ethan, kneeling in front of him. "Don't do this. I promise I'll change. I promise I'll stop." Her voice was hoarse, her hands trying to grab Ethan's arms. But Ethan looked down with a cold stare. He didn't try to pull his hands away, but he didn't respond to her touch either. "I've heard the same promise too many times. And every time you repeat it again. This time there are no more promises. Only reality." Jessica fell silent, as if those words had destroyed all her will to beg. She looked down, her crying growing louder. Sophia stepped closer to Daniel. "I don't know if I'll choose the same path as Ethan or not," she said with a trembling voice. "But one thing is certain, tonight I stop believing in you. Whatever happens next, you should know. You have destroyed something that you can never fix." Daniel tried to touch Sophia's arm, but she took half a step back, avoiding him. Tears fell from her eyes, but unlike Jessica's tears, Sophia's eyes were filled with a courage that had just been born from her wounds. Ethan grabbed the folder on the table, took out a piece of paper, and placed it in front of Jessica. "I'll give you a week to sign this. After that, I'll take care of everything myself." You can't stop this process. He looked at Jessica one last time, not with hatred, but with the gaze of a man who had let go of all his burdens. A gaze that said that love, anger, and pain were over, replaced by a firm decision. Without waiting for an answer, Ethan turned and walked out of the apartment with Sophia. Their footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway, the sound of rain outside welcoming them like the curtain closing on a long drama. Inside the room, Jessica slumped in her chair, her face hidden in her hands, while Daniel stood silently, staring blankly at the door that had just closed. The two betrayers were now trapped in silence, haunted by the shadows of their own mistakes. The rain had stopped by the time Ethan arrived home. The night felt quieter than usual, with only the sound of raindrops falling from the roof onto the ground, creating a slow rhythm in the air. He opened the door, stepped inside, and found the house silent. There was no sound of Jessica, no scent of perfume that usually filled the room. Only silence awaited him. Ethan hung his coat on the hanger, then walked slowly into the living room. He sat on the sofa looking around. The house, which had always been full of arguments and tension, now felt different. It was quiet, yes, but no longer a torturous silence. The silence felt spacious, as if it gave him room to breathe freely. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let his mind wander. Jessica's face flashed before his eyes, the laughter he once loved, the memories of the warm early days of their marriage. All of that had once been real, once been beautiful. But time and bad choices had torn everything apart. Ethan knew it wasn't just Jessica who was at fault, but also himself for holding on too long, hoping for something that was long gone. Footsteps sounded at the door, and Ryan entered carrying a bottle of drink. "I thought you might need some company tonight," he said, trying to smile. Ethan opened his eyes, looked at his friend, and nodded. "Maybe you're right." They sat together, talking without saying much. Ryan didn't give any long advice, just listened, because he knew that sometimes silence was the most sincere form of understanding. As the night grew late, Ryan said goodbye and left. Ethan was alone again, walking to his room. He stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection, which looked calmer than it had in the past few weeks. His eyes still held pain, but they also held a new light. A light born of the courage to let go. Ethan opened the window, letting the night air in. The wind carried the scent of wet earth, soothing his chest. He took a deep breath, then smiled faintly. For the first time he felt silence as freedom, not loneliness. In his heart, he knew his life's journey was not over. There would be new days, perhaps difficult, perhaps full of challenges. But one thing was certain, he was moving forward without the shadow of lies. He was moving forward with his dignity intact, with a calmness that had finally returned. And that night, under the sky that slowly grew brighter, Ethan closed his eyes in peace. No longer as a man bound by betrayal, but as someone who was finally free.